I was the good daughter, the one who studied hard, sacrificed everything, and held our family together while everyone else fell apart. I thought my sister's engagement to a promising prosecutor would finally change her life for the better. But when she stood up at her own engagement party to humiliate me in front of everyone, calling me a failed judge who could only pass judgment on other people's families because I had none of my own, her fiancé's response froze the entire room. "You're the judge here tonight," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like ice. "Tell everyone what really happened 5 years ago." That moment shattered everything I thought I knew about my family and unleashed the secret I'd buried so deep I almost believed it never happened. My name is Clara Monroe, and I should have known that night would end in disaster the moment I walked into the Riverside Country Club. The chandeliers cast everything in that fake golden glow that makes even the most rotten situations look picture perfect. And my sister Samantha was practically glowing herself as she floated between clusters of relatives and family friends, her engagement ring catching the light every time she gestured. At 34, I'd learned to read rooms like I read court documents methodically, looking for the details everyone else missed. Tonight, I noticed how our parents beamed at Samantha like she'd just discovered the cure for cancer instead of simply managing to get engaged. I noticed how her fiancé, Ethan Caldwell, stood slightly apart from the celebration, his prosecutor's eyes scanning the crowd with an intensity that made my stomach twist. "Clara." Samantha's voice cut through the ambient chatter around 7:30, drawing every head in our direction. She was wearing that smile, the one that looked beautiful from a distance but turned predatory up close. "Everyone, come meet my big sister, the one I was telling you about." I forced myself to smile as cousins, family friends, and Ethan's colleagues formed a semicircle around us. This was Samantha's moment, her engagement party, and I'd promised myself I'd get through it without incident. I'd spent 34 years perfecting the art of being the reliable one, the one who didn't make waves. "Clara's a judge," Samantha announced, her voice dripping with that particular tone she'd perfected over the years, the one that sounded like praise but carried an undercurrent of something sharper. "Family court? Actually, she spends her days deciding who gets to keep their children and who doesn't." A few people murmured appreciatively, the way they always did when someone mentioned my job. Respected profession, important work, all of that. But Samantha wasn't finished. "It's perfect for her. Really," she continued, taking a sip of champagne that somehow made her next words sound even more cutting. "She gets to judge other people's families since she's never managed to build one of her own." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt my face flush hot, then cold, as every person in that circle suddenly found their shoes fascinating. This was classic Samantha the surgical strike disguised as sisterly teasing, delivered with just enough of a laugh to make anyone who called her out look like they couldn't take a joke. I opened my mouth to respond, to deflect with some self-deprecating comment that would smooth over the moment and let everyone get back to celebrating. That's what I always did. That's what was expected. But then Ethan stepped forward. I'd barely spoken to him before tonight, knew him only as the golden boy prosecutor who'd somehow captured my sister's attention long enough for her to agree to marriage. He was handsome in that clean-cut way that photographed well in campaign ads, with dark hair and sharp features that suggested intelligence and ambition in equal measure. Now, looking at him, I saw something else entirely. His jaw was set, his eyes cold, and when he spoke, his voice carried the same authority I recognized from my own courtroom. "You're the judge here tonight," he said, his words falling into the silence like stones into still water. Every eye in the room turned to him, then back to me. "Tell everyone what really happened 5 years ago." The champagne glass in my hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. The room seemed to tilt, and I had to fight to keep my expression neutral even as my mind raced. 5 years ago. How could he possibly know about 5 years ago? Samantha's face had gone pale beneath her perfectly applied makeup. "Ethan, what are you—" Tell them about Emily, he continued, his prosecutor's instincts clearly kicking in as he pressed his advantage. Tell them about the little girl you took care of for 8 months, the one you loved like your own daughter. The name hit me like a physical blow. Emily. Sweet, bright Emily with her gap-toothed grin and the way she used to fall asleep holding my hand. I hadn't heard her name spoken aloud in years, had trained myself not to think about her, not to wonder where she was or if she was safe. I don't know what you think you know, Samantha said, her voice rising with an edge of panic. But this is my engagement party, and I won't have you— Sit down, Samantha. Ethan's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Let your sister tell the story. The real story. Around us, the party had effectively stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence, and even the catering staff seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere, moving more quietly as they refilled glasses and cleared plates. Our parents, who had been holding court near the bar, were making their way over with expressions of growing concern. I looked at Ethan, trying to understand how this man I barely knew had somehow unearthed the most painful chapter of my life. His eyes met mine, and I saw something there that surprised me, not malice, but something that looked almost like compassion. 5 years ago, I heard myself say, my voice steadier than I felt. My sister called me at 2:15 in the morning. The silence stretched as I gathered the words I'd never spoken aloud, words that carried the weight of a lifetime of unspoken resentment. Looking at the faces around me, family members who'd watched our dynamic play out for decades, I realized they deserved to understand why that phone call 5 years ago mattered so much. But first, they needed to understand us. You want to know about 5 years ago? I said, my voice finding strength I didn't know I still possessed. Then you need to understand what came before. You need to understand what it was like growing up as Samantha Monroe's older sister. Our mother, who had finally reached the edge of our circle, opened her mouth to interrupt, but I held up my hand. For once in my life, I wasn't going to let someone else control the narrative. From the time we were children, there were 2 different sets of rules in our house. Samantha was the beautiful one, the charming one, the one who could talk her way out of anything. When she failed her algebra test sophomore year, Dad hired her a tutor and took her out for ice cream afterward to boost her confidence. When I came home with anything less than an A, I was grounded until I could prove I'd learned my lesson. I saw my father shift uncomfortably near the bar, his face flushing red above his collar. These weren't family secrets. Everyone in this room had witnessed some version of this dynamic over the years, but no one had ever called it out so directly. When Samantha got arrested for underage drinking at 17, our parents hired the best lawyer in town and somehow got the charges dropped. When I got a parking ticket at 19, I had to pay it myself and listen to a lecture about responsibility and consequences. The memories came flooding back with crystal clarity. Samantha at 15, coming home at 3 in the morning reeking of alcohol and cigarettes, slipping into bed while our parents pretended not to notice. Samantha at 20, dropping out of college after 1 semester because she needed to find herself. While I worked 2 jobs to put myself through law school. Samantha at 25, moving back home after her 3rd failed relationship while I was building my career and trying to establish my independence. I learned early that my job in this family was to be the responsible one, I continued, feeling years of suppressed anger bubbling to the surface. I was the one who picked up the pieces, who smoothed things over, who made excuses. When Samantha got fired from jobs, I helped her find new ones. When she needed money, I lent it to her money I never saw again. When she got into trouble, I was the one our parents called to talk sense into her. Samantha's face had gone from pale to flushed, her hands clenched around her champagne glass. Clara, you're being dramatic. That's not how— Let me finish. My voice cracked like a whip, and she actually flinched. I'd never spoken to her like that before, had never allowed myself to show even a fraction of the frustration I'd carried for so long. For 31 years, I watched our parents celebrate your every small accomplishment while taking mine for granted. When you got your GED at 23, they threw you a party. When I graduated law school summa cum laude, they sent a card. I turned to face our parents directly, noting how our mother's face had crumpled and our father couldn't quite meet my eyes. When you bought your first car with money you'd saved money I'd lent you, they called everyone they knew to brag about your newfound responsibility. When I bought my house, the same week I was appointed to the bench, they asked if I was sure I could afford the mortgage payments. The weight of those accumulated slights, those decades of being taken for granted while Samantha was celebrated for meeting the most basic standards of adult behavior, pressed down on me like a physical force. Around us, relatives who'd witnessed these dynamics over the years looked uncomfortable, as if seeing their own complicity in maintaining this family mythology. I told myself it didn't matter, I said, my voice softer now but no less intense. I told myself that being the stable one, the reliable one, was enough, that watching you drift from crisis to crisis while everyone enabled you was just the price of being the older sister. I convinced myself that love meant always being there to catch you when you fell, no matter how many times you jumped. Ethan was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, his prosecutor's training no doubt cataloging every word for future reference. But there was something else there too, a recognition, perhaps, of someone finally telling a truth that had been buried for too long. By the time I turned 30, I'd given up on the idea of having my own family, I admitted, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Who had time for dating when there was always another Samantha crisis to manage? Who could risk bringing someone into our family dynamic when I never knew when I'd need to drop everything to bail my sister out of whatever mess she'd gotten herself into this time? I looked directly at Samantha, seeing her as if for the first time not as my beloved, troubled little sister, but as a 31-year-old woman who'd never been held accountable for her choices because there was always someone else ready to clean up the mess. So when you called me that night 5 years ago, I said, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper, crying and desperate and begging me to help you one more time. I did what I always did. I came running. The phone rang at 2:15 in the morning on a Tuesday in March. I remember the exact time because I was sitting at my kitchen table, reviewing case files for the next day's hearings, when Samantha's name lit up my screen. Even in my sleep-deprived state, I knew immediately that something was catastrophically wrong. Samantha never called me unless she needed something, and she certainly never called at 2:15 in the morning unless it was an emergency. Clara. Her voice was barely recognizable, hoarse, shaking, desperate in a way that made my blood run cold. I need you to come get me, please. I'm at the Riverside Motel on Highway 12, room 207. Please hurry. I didn't ask questions. I threw on the first clothes I could find and drove through empty streets, my mind racing through possibilities, each one worse than the last. The Riverside Motel was the kind of place people went when they'd run out of better options, a strip of faded blue doors facing a parking lot full of potholes and broken dreams. When I knocked on room 207, it took Samantha nearly 5 minutes to answer. When the door finally cracked open, I barely recognized the woman standing there. My sister, who had always been vain about her appearance, looked like she hadn't slept or showered in days. Her eyes were bloodshot and wild, her hands shaking as she pulled me inside. But it wasn't Samantha's condition that stopped my heart. It was the little girl sitting on the bed, clutching a stuffed elephant that had seen better days. She couldn't have been more than 2 years old, with dark curls that hung in tangles around her face and huge brown eyes that seemed too old for such a small person. She was wearing a pink dress that was stained and wrinkled, and when she looked at me, she didn't smile or hide the way most toddlers do around strangers. She just watched, as if she'd learned early that adults were unpredictable creatures who might help or hurt, depending on their mood. "This is Emily," Samantha said, her voice cracking on the name. She's mine." The room smelled like cigarettes and something else I couldn't identify, something sour and desperate. There were empty bottles scattered across the dresser, and the carpet was stained with things I didn't want to think about. In the corner, a diaper bag sat open, its contents spilling onto the floor. "How long has she been with you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm while my mind raced to process this revelation. Samantha had never mentioned having a child, had never shown any interest in children beyond the occasional complaint about how loud they were in restaurants. 2 years, Samantha whispered, sinking into the room's single chair. Her father. He left when I told him I was pregnant, said it wasn't his problem. I've been trying to make it work. Clara, I really have, but I can't. I can't do this anymore. I knelt down in front of Emily, noting the way she shrank back slightly, the wariness in her expression that no 2-year-old should have to carry. "Hi, sweetheart," I said softly. "I'm Clara. I'm Samantha's sister." Emily didn't respond, but she didn't run away either. Up close, I could see that she was too thin, that her dress hung loose on her tiny frame. There were faint bruises on her arms that could have been from normal toddler falls, but something in my gut told me they weren't. "Samantha," I said carefully, "what's been happening here? How long have you been at this motel?" 3 days, she admitted, not meeting my eyes. "I got evicted from our apartment, couldn't make rent, and Marcus." She gestured vaguely toward the bottles. "He's been helping me cope, but things got out of hand. He got angry when Emily wouldn't stop crying, and I thought maybe if I called you." The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. Marcus was clearly Samantha's latest boyfriend, the kind of man who thought helping a woman cope meant supplying her with pills or alcohol or whatever else would numb the reality of her situation. Emily had been caught in the middle of it all, an innocent child trapped in an adult world she was too young to understand or escape. "Where is Marcus now?" I asked. "Gone. We had a fight last night. He said he was done with both of us." Samantha's voice was flat, empty. "I don't have anywhere else to go. Clara, no money, no job, no family except you and Emily. She deserves better than this." I looked at the little girl again, noting how she clutched her elephant tighter when Samantha's voice rose, how she watched the door as if expecting someone dangerous to walk through it, how she flinched when I moved too quickly. "Come home with me," I heard myself say, "both of you, tonight." The relief on Samantha's face was immediate and overwhelming. "Really, you'd do that?" Of course I would, despite everything, despite the years of disappointment and broken promises, despite the fact that she'd hidden the existence of her own daughter from our entire family for 2 years. Of course I would help her. It's what I always did. What I didn't expect was how quickly Emily would steal my heart. Within a week of moving into my spare bedroom, she was following me around my house like a tiny shadow, her serious brown eyes drinking in everything I did. Within 2 weeks, she was calling me Aunt Clara in a voice so sweet it made my chest ache. Within a month, I couldn't imagine my life without her morning hugs and bedtime stories and the way she would crawl into my lap when Samantha was having one of her bad days. And Samantha was having a lot of bad days. The withdrawal from whatever she'd been taking was brutal. She slept for 16 hours at a time, then stayed awake for days, pacing my living room like a caged animal. She barely interacted with Emily, leaving all the childcare to me while she focused on getting clean and figuring things out. I didn't mind. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I had a real purpose beyond my work. Emily brought a joy into my house that I hadn't even realized was missing. She was smart and funny and resilient in ways that broke my heart and filled it simultaneously. By month 3, I was the one getting her up in the morning, the one feeding her breakfast and reading her stories and putting her to bed. I was the one she reached for when she was scared, the one she ran to when she scraped her knee. Samantha was clean by then, attending meetings and seeing a therapist, but she seemed more interested in rebuilding her own life than in being Emily's mother. 8 months. Emily lived with me for 8 perfect months. 8 months during which I discovered what it meant to love someone so completely that their happiness mattered more than your own. 8 months during which I started to believe that maybe, despite everything, I could have the family I'd always wanted. Then came the phone call that changed everything. The silence in the country club was deafening as I finished recounting those 8 months, the best 8 months of my life. I could see the shock on my relatives' faces, the way they were processing this revelation about a child none of them had ever known existed. But I wasn't finished. The worst part was still coming. "How does he know about Emily?" Samantha whispered, her voice barely audible as she stared at Ethan with something approaching terror. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a manila folder, the kind prosecutors use for case files. "Because I've spent the last 3 months investigating you. Samantha, ever since you told me you'd never wanted children, that you couldn't understand why anyone would want to be tied down by motherhood, something about the way you said it didn't ring true." He opened the folder, and I caught a glimpse of official documents, photographs, what looked like court records. It started with a simple background check, standard procedure before proposing to someone. But then I found discrepancies in your employment history, gaps in your timeline that didn't add up. My stomach dropped. "What kind of discrepancies?" "So, the kind that suggested she'd been receiving government assistance for a dependent child from 2018 to 2020, Ethan said, his prosecutor's voice cutting through the air like a blade. Child support payments, food stamps, housing assistance, all for a daughter named Emily Rose Turner. The name hit me like a physical blow. Emily Rose Turner, not Emily Monroe, which meant Samantha had never legally acknowledged her as family. She'd kept her birth father's surname, kept her at arm's length even on paper. "You investigated me." Samantha's voice was rising, a mix of outrage and panic. "You had no right to—" "I had every right." Ethan cut her off. "I'm a prosecutor. Samantha, I know how to recognize when someone is lying to me, and you've been lying about everything since the day we met." He pulled out a photograph and placed it on the nearby table where everyone could see it. It was Emily, my Emily, but older than when I'd last seen her. Maybe 4 years old, standing in what looked like a school playground, smiling at the camera with that same gap-toothed grin that used to light up my entire world. "Where did you get this?" I whispered, my hands shaking as I reached for the picture. "From her current foster family," Ethan said quietly, and the words hit me like a physical blow. "The Martinez family in Dayton. They've been caring for her for the past 3 years." 3 years? Emily had been in foster care for 3 years, and I had no idea. I felt the room spin, felt my carefully constructed world crashing down around me. "That's impossible," I managed to say. Samantha took her back. She got clean. She got a job. She was ready to be a mother again. "She was ready to perform being a mother," Ethan corrected, his voice gentle but relentless. "For exactly 6 weeks. Long enough to convince you she'd changed. Long enough to take Emily back before you could try to make the arrangement permanent." I looked at Samantha, searching her face for some sign that this was all a terrible mistake, but the guilt written across her features told me everything I needed to know. "Tell them what happened after you took Emily back," Ethan continued. "Tell them about the boyfriend who didn't want to deal with a toddler. Tell them about the eviction notice you ignored. Tell them about the night you dropped Emily off at a fire station with a note pinned to her dress." "Stop," Samantha whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Please, just stop." But I couldn't stop. I needed to hear all of it, needed to understand the full scope of what had happened to the little girl I'd loved like my own daughter. A fire station. Our mother's voice was barely a whisper. "Samantha, you didn't—" "She was better off," Samantha said, her voice defensive even through her tears. "I couldn't take care of her properly, at least at the fire station. Someone would find her quickly, make sure she got help." "She was 3 years old," I said, my voice breaking. "She was 3 years old, and you abandoned her like she was garbage." The image of Emily frightened, confused, clutching her stuffed elephant as strangers took her away was more than I could bear. I had to grip the back of a chair to keep from collapsing. What happened to her after that?" I asked Ethan, though I wasn't sure I could handle the answer. "Emergency placement, then temporary foster care while social services tried to locate family members. But Samantha had listed herself as having no family support system, no emergency contacts except for a sister who was unable to provide care due to demanding career obligations. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that for a moment I couldn't breathe. You told them I couldn't take care of her." "I thought it would be better for everyone," Samantha said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You were so busy with work, and I didn't want to burden you again." Burden me. The words exploded out of me with a force that made several people step back. Taking care of Emily was the greatest joy of my life. I would have adopted her in a heartbeat if you'd given me the chance. I would have given her everything: love, stability, a real home. You don't understand," Samantha said desperately. "I was in a really bad place. Derek didn't want kids around, and I thought maybe if I could just get my life together first." "Derek." Our father's voice was sharp. "Who's Derek? I thought you were dating someone named Mike." The lie unraveled in real time. Samantha's face went white as she realized she'd mentioned a name she'd never told our parents about. Another boyfriend, another relationship she'd hidden, another chapter in a life built on deception. "It doesn't matter," she said weakly. "What matters is that Emily is fine. She's in a good home. She's being taken care of." "By strangers," I said, my voice cold with fury. "She's being taken care of by strangers because you were too selfish to let the people who actually loved her know what happened." I turned to Ethan, a terrible suspicion forming in my mind. "How long have you known about this? How long have you known she was in foster care?" 2 months, he admitted. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you. I knew if I came to you directly, you'd want to contact the family, maybe try to visit Emily, but I also knew that would destroy any chance of getting the truth out of Samantha." 2 months. For 2 months. He'd known that Emily was alive and safe, and he'd said nothing. For 2 months. He'd let me continue believing that she was happily living with her mother when the truth was so much more heartbreaking. "You used her," I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. "You used Emily's situation to trap Samantha. This whole engagement, this whole relationship, it was all an investigation." Ethan didn't deny it. "I'm a prosecutor, Clara. When I see evidence of child abandonment, of welfare fraud, of systematic deception, I investigate. It's what I do." The explosion came from the most unexpected source. "This is ridiculous." Samantha's voice cracked like a whip across the stunned silence. "You want to talk about deception, Ethan? You've been lying to me for months. You pretended to love me. You proposed to me. You made me believe we had a future together all so you could what? Gather evidence for some twisted prosecution fantasy." She turned to face the crowd of relatives and friends who had come to celebrate what they thought was her engagement, her face flushed with righteous indignation. "This man has been manipulating all of us. He's obsessed with my past, with mistakes I made years ago when I was struggling with addiction and mental health issues. He can't accept that people change, that people grow." I watched in horrified fascination as Samantha worked the room, her natural charisma kicking in even in the face of complete exposure. Several of our relatives nodded sympathetically, their faces softening as she painted herself as the victim of Ethan's deception. "And you," she wheeled around to face me, her eyes blazing with an anger I'd never seen before. "You're just as bad as he is. You've been waiting for this moment, haven't you? Waiting for an excuse to destroy my happiness, to make me pay for every perceived slight from our childhood." "Samantha, that's not—" "Don't you dare!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the country club's vaulted ceiling. "Don't you dare pretend this isn't exactly what you wanted. You've resented me our entire lives. You've hated that people actually liked me, that I could make friends and attract men while you buried yourself in books and work. You couldn't stand that I found love with someone successful and respected." The accusations hit me like physical blows, each one designed to find the deepest wounds in my psyche. Around us, I could see our relatives shifting uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Samantha and me as if they were watching a tennis match. "You manipulated Emily's situation just like Ethan did," Samantha continued, her voice rising to near hysteria. "You used that poor little girl to make yourself feel important, to play house and pretend you were a mother when you've never had a maternal bone in your body. Then, when I got clean and wanted her back, you made me feel guilty for wanting my own daughter." "That's enough!" Our mother's voice cut through Samantha's tirade, but not in the way I'd hoped. "Clara, this has gone too far. I don't know what you're trying to accomplish with this public humiliation, but it needs to stop." I stared at our mother in disbelief. Public humiliation. "Mom, did you hear what she just admitted? She abandoned a 3-year-old child at a fire station." "People make mistakes when they're struggling with addiction," our father said, his voice heavy with the same protective tone he'd used to excuse Samantha's behavior our entire lives. "That doesn't make them monsters. Samantha was sick, Clara. She needed help, not judgment." She had help. The words exploded out of me with a force that surprised everyone, including myself. She had me for 8 months. She had a safe place to live, food on the table, someone to take care of her daughter while she got clean. And instead of being grateful, instead of trying to build a life for Emily, she used that time to plan her next escape. "You don't know what it's like," Samantha shot back, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. "You don't know what it's like to struggle with depression and addiction and the overwhelming responsibility of a child when you can barely take care of yourself. You've never had to make those kinds of impossible choices." "You're right," I said, my voice deadly quiet. "I've never had to make those choices because I've never abandoned my responsibilities. I've never put my own desires ahead of an innocent child's welfare. I've never lied to social services to prevent my own family from helping." "Clara's always been jealous of Samantha," our mother said to the crowd, as if explaining away an embarrassing family quirk. "She's never understood that not everyone can be as rigid as she is. Some people need more support, more understanding." The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that for a moment I couldn't speak. Here I was, finally telling the truth about years of dysfunction and favoritism, and they were closing ranks around Samantha just like they always had. "Jealous," I finally managed to say. "You think I'm jealous of what? Of her addiction, of her complete inability to take responsibility for her actions, of the fact that she's 31 years old and has never held a job for more than 6 months, of the fact that people actually like her," our father said quietly, and his words hit me like a slap across the face. "Samantha makes friends easily. She's warm and spontaneous and fun. You've always been difficult, Clara, critical, hard to please." The room was spinning. I looked around at the faces of people I'd known my entire life, aunts and uncles and cousins who had watched this dynamic play out for decades and saw the same uncomfortable truth reflected in their expressions. They all thought I was the problem, the uptight older sister who couldn't let go of childhood grievances, the bitter spinster taking out her frustrations on her beautiful, troubled younger sister. "So that's it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Emily doesn't matter. The fact that there's a 6-year-old girl in foster care because Samantha was too selfish to let anyone help her, that's just a detail we're supposed to overlook because Samantha is warm and spontaneous." "Emily is fine," Samantha said, her voice stronger now that she had the family's support. She's in a good home with people who can take care of her properly. Maybe it's time you accepted that not every story has to end with you as the hero. Clara. I looked at Ethan, who had remained silent through this entire family meltdown, his prosecutor's eyes taking in every word, every gesture, every revealing moment of dysfunction. He met my gaze with something that might have been sympathy. "Tell me something, Ethan," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "In all your investigation, did you find any evidence that Samantha has had any contact with Emily since she abandoned her, any attempt to check on her welfare, to send support, to maintain any kind of relationship?" "None," he said simply. "And the welfare fraud, the benefits she collected for a child she wasn't actually supporting. Ongoing for 18 months after Emily entered foster care, approximately $12,000 in fraudulent claims. The numbers hung in the air like an indictment. $12,000. Samantha had continued to profit from Emily's existence even after abandoning her. "That's a felony," I said quietly. "Clara, don't," our mother warned, but I wasn't finished. "That's a felony, and it's been ongoing for 3 years, which means the statute of limitations hasn't run out, which means she could still be prosecuted." The threat hung in the air between us, changing the entire dynamic of the room. Suddenly, this wasn't just about family drama or old resentments. This was about criminal behavior, about consequences that couldn't be explained away or smoothed over with charm and manipulation. "You wouldn't," Samantha whispered, but I could see the fear in her eyes. "You wouldn't destroy your own sister." "I wouldn't," I agreed. "But I might fight for Emily." The words hung in the air like a declaration of war, and I felt something fundamental shift inside me. For 34 years, I had been the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over conflicts and kept the family together, but standing there in that country club, surrounded by people who had just chosen to protect Samantha's lies over an innocent child's welfare, I realized I was done being that person. "Fight for Emily," our father said, his voice sharp with warning. "Clara, you need to think very carefully about what you're saying. Emily isn't your child. You have no legal standing, no right to interfere in decisions that have already been made." "Actually, I do." I turned to face my family with a clarity I'd never felt before. As a family court judge, I understand exactly what rights I have, and as someone who provided primary care for Emily for 8 months, I have standing to petition for visitation rights, possibly even custody, especially given the circumstances of her placement in foster care. The color drained from Samantha's face. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. "In fact, I'm going to call my attorney right now and start the process." "Clara, stop." Our mother's voice carried a note of panic I'd rarely heard. "You're upset. You're not thinking clearly. Emily has been with this foster family for 3 years. She's settled. She's happy. You can't just disrupt her life because you're angry with Samantha." "I'm not angry with Samantha," I said, and realized it was true. The anger had burned away, leaving something much cleaner and more purposeful in its place. "I'm disappointed in all of you, but this isn't about Samantha anymore. This is about a little girl who was abandoned by her mother and hidden from the family members who would have loved her unconditionally." I hit dial and put the phone to my ear. Around me, the party guests watched in stunned silence as I waited for my attorney to answer. "Margaret, it's Clara Monroe. I know it's late, but I need to discuss an urgent family court matter." "Yes, I'll hold." "You're making a mistake," our father said quietly. "Even if you succeed in getting visitation rights, even if you manage to disrupt Emily's current placement, what then? You're a single woman with a demanding career. How do you plan to provide stability for a child when you work 60-hour weeks?" It was a fair question, one I'd been asking myself since the moment I learned Emily was in foster care, but the answer came to me with startling clarity. I'll resign from the bench if I have to, I said, and felt the weight of that decision settle over me like a warm blanket. I'll take a position in private practice, something with regular hours and predictable schedules. I'll do whatever it takes to give Emily the life she deserves. The gasps around the room were audible. I had worked for 15 years to reach my position as a family court judge. It was everything I'd ever wanted professionally, the culmination of decades of sacrifice and ambition, and I was willing to give it all up for a little girl I hadn't seen in 3 years. Margaret, thank you for taking my call. I turned slightly away from my family, but kept my voice loud enough for them to hear every word. I need to file for emergency visitation rights for a child named Emily Rose Turner, currently in foster care in Dayton. She's the daughter of my sister, but I served as her primary caregiver for 8 months before she was placed. Yes, I understand the complexity of the situation. Behind me, I could hear Samantha crying, but it was different from her usual tears. These sounded real, raw, like they were coming from a place deeper than manipulation or self-pity. "Clara, please," she whispered. "Don't do this. I know I made mistakes, but I'm different now. I'm getting married. I'm stable. I have a good life. If you drag all this into court, it'll destroy everything I've built." I turned to face her, holding the phone away from my ear for a moment. "What about what you destroyed? Samantha, what about Emily's chance to grow up knowing her family? What about the years I've spent believing she was safe and loved when she was actually bouncing between foster homes?" "She is safe," Samantha insisted. "The Martinez family, they're good people. They love her." "I'm sure they are good people," I agreed. "And I'm grateful to them for caring for her when no one else could. But Emily deserves to know that she has an aunt who loves her, grandparents who would have welcomed her, a family that never stopped caring about her even when her mother gave up." Ethan stepped forward, and I realized he'd been silent through this entire exchange, letting the family drama play out while he gathered information for whatever legal action he was planning. "Clara," he said quietly, "there's something else you should know. The Martinez family, they've filed papers to adopt Emily. The proceedings are scheduled to begin next month." The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering to the floor. "Adopt her." "Emily has been with them for 3 years. Under Ohio law, when a child has been in continuous foster care for more than 2 years and the biological parents have had no contact, the foster family can petition for adoption. Samantha's parental rights are going to be terminated whether she fights it or not." I looked at my sister, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in my life. She wasn't the troubled but lovable little sister I'd been protecting all these years. She wasn't the victim of circumstances beyond her control. She was a 31-year-old woman who had made a series of selfish choices that had resulted in her daughter being raised by strangers. "You knew," I said, the pieces falling into place. "You knew they were planning to adopt her, and you never said anything. You were going to let Emily disappear into another family forever, rather than admit what you'd done." "I thought it was better for everyone," Samantha said weakly. "Emily has a stable home. The Martinez family wants to keep her, and I get to start over with someone who doesn't know about my past mistakes." "Start over." I repeated the words like they tasted bitter. "Is that what you call it? Starting over by pretending your daughter never existed?" I bent down to pick up my phone, noting that Margaret was still on the line, probably hearing every word of this family implosion. Margaret, I'm here. Yes, there's an adoption proceeding pending. I understand. What are our options if I want to file for custody rather than just visitation?" As I listened to my attorney explain the legal complexities of challenging a pending adoption, I felt my family's eyes on me. Some looked shocked, others disapproving, but I no longer cared what they thought. For the first time in my adult life, I was making a decision based on what I wanted rather than what was expected of me. "I'll be in your office first thing Monday morning," I told Margaret. "And Margaret, I want you to explore every possible legal avenue. I don't care how complicated it gets or how long it takes. I'm going to fight for Emily, and I'm going to win." When I hung up and turned back to face my family, I saw a sea of faces ranging from shock to disapproval to something that might have been admiration on Ethan's part. "This is war, then," our father said quietly. "No," I corrected him. "This is love, and it's about time Emily had someone in her life who understood the difference." The courtroom was packed on the morning of October 15th, 3 months after Samantha's disastrous engagement party. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Margaret, my hands folded calmly in my lap despite the storm of emotions churning inside me. Across the aisle, Samantha sat with her public defender, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. The past 3 months had not been kind to my sister. Judge Patricia Hendricks, whom I'd known professionally for years, called the court to order. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a family court judge, sitting as a petitioner in family court, fighting for custody of a child whose mother was about to face criminal charges. "So, this court is here to address multiple matters concerning the minor child, Emily Rose Turner," Judge Hendricks announced. "We have before us a petition for custody filed by Clara Monroe, pending adoption proceedings by the Martinez family, and criminal charges against the biological mother, Samantha Monroe." The months since that night at the country club had been a whirlwind of legal maneuvering and painful discoveries. True to his word, Ethan had filed criminal charges against Samantha for welfare fraud, child abandonment, and providing false information to social services. The case had made headlines in our small Ohio town. Local judge fights for custody while sister faces criminal charges. But the media attention had worked in my favor in ways I hadn't expected. 3 other families had come forward with stories about Samantha's behavior during Emily's early years, neighbors who remembered hearing a child crying for hours, a daycare worker who'd reported suspicious bruises, a former landlord who'd found drug paraphernalia in an apartment where a toddler was living. Your Honor," Margaret began, rising to address the court. "My client seeks emergency custody of Emily Turner based on her existing relationship with the child and the failure of social services to properly investigate family placement options when the child first entered care." I had spent countless hours preparing for this moment, gathering evidence, documenting every day of those 8 months when Emily had lived with me, bank records showing purchases of children's clothing and toys, pediatric records from Emily's doctor visits, photographs of Emily's bedroom in my house, still exactly as she'd left it 3 years ago. But the most powerful evidence came from Emily herself. The court-appointed child advocate, Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to anyone in our family, had spent weeks interviewing Emily about her memories and preferences. What she'd found had given me hope, even as it broke my heart. "Emily has clear memories of living with Ms. Monroe," Dr. Chen testified when called to the stand. She refers to her as Aunt Clara and describes feeling safe and loved during that time. When shown photographs of various family members, Emily immediately identified Ms. Monroe and asked when she could see her again. I watched the Martinez family sitting in the gallery, their faces etched with pain and worry. Carlos and Maria Martinez had loved Emily for 3 years, had given her stability when no one else could. They were good people caught in an impossible situation, and I felt genuine anguish about the pain this custody battle was causing them. But when Emily herself was brought into the judge's chambers for a private interview standard procedure for children over 5 in custody cases, the outcome became clear. "She wants to see her Aunt Clara," Judge Hendricks reported when court resumed after the private session. "She has fond memories of their time together and expressed confusion about why the contact stopped so abruptly. She also asked about her mother, wondering why Samantha never visits or calls." That question hung in the air as Samantha was called to testify. Watching my sister take the stand was one of the most difficult moments of my life. She looked exhausted, defeated, a shadow of the vibrant woman who had once commanded attention in any room. "Ms. Monroe," the prosecutor began, "in the 3 years since Emily entered foster care, how many times have you attempted to contact her?" I haven't," Samantha admitted, her voice barely audible. Have you sent birthday cards, Christmas presents? Any form of communication? No. Have you made any effort to visit her or inquire about her welfare? I thought it was better if I stayed away, Samantha said, tears streaming down her face. I didn't want to confuse her or disrupt her new life. But you continued to collect welfare benefits in her name for 18 months after she entered care. I needed the money. I was struggling, and I thought since she was still my daughter legally. The cross-examination was brutal but necessary. Every lie, every selfish decision, every moment when Samantha had chosen her own comfort over Emily's welfare was laid bare before the court. By the time she stepped down from the witness stand, even I felt sorry for her. The criminal sentencing came first. Judge Hendricks handed down 18 months in prison, suspended to 6 months with 3 years probation, plus full restitution of the fraudulent benefits. It was a lighter sentence than it could have been, but it effectively ended any chance Samantha might have had of regaining custody. In the matter of custody, Judge Hendricks continued, this court finds that the best interests of the child would be served by placement with Clara Monroe, with supervised visitation rights granted to the Martinez family during a transition period. The gavel came down with a sound like thunder, and I felt my knees nearly give way with relief. After 3 months of legal battles, after years of believing Emily was lost to me forever, I was going to be her guardian. But the real moment of truth came 2 weeks later, when Emily walked into my house for the first time in 3 years. She was taller, of course, her baby roundness replaced by the lean angles of childhood. Her dark curls were longer, pulled back in the kind of neat ponytail that spoke of loving, careful attention from the Martinez family. But her eyes, those serious brown eyes that had always seemed too old for her face, lit up the moment she saw me. "Aunt Clara," she said, and launched herself into my arms with a force that nearly knocked me over. Holding her again, feeling her small arms wrapped around my neck, I finally understood what people meant when they talked about coming home. This was it. This was what I'd been searching for my entire life without even knowing it. "I missed you so much," I whispered into her hair, breathing in the scent of children's shampoo and something indefinably Emily. "I missed you too," she said, pulling back to look at me with those solemn eyes. "Mama Maria said you've been fighting for me, like a superhero." Maria Martinez stood in my doorway, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. The transition plan we'd worked out allowed Emily to maintain contact with the family who had loved her for 3 years while building a new life with me. It wasn't perfect, but it was kind and thoughtful and centered entirely on what was best for Emily. "Thank you," I told Maria, meaning it more than I'd ever meant anything. "Thank you for taking care of her when I couldn't." "She's a special little girl," Maria said softly. "You're very lucky." "Yes," I agreed, watching Emily explore the house that would now be her permanent home, seeing her face light up when she found her old bedroom exactly as she'd left it. "I am." That night, as I tucked Emily into her own bed for the first time in 3 years, she looked up at me with a question in her eyes. "Aunt Clara, where's my mama, the one who had me first?" I took a deep breath, knowing this conversation would be the first of many difficult ones we'd need to have. "Your mama Samantha is. She's working on getting better. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and they need time to fix them." Emily nodded solemnly, processing this with the wisdom of a child who had seen too much but somehow remained hopeful. "Will I see her again?" "Maybe someday, when she's ready," I said honestly. "But right now, you're here with me, and you're safe, and you're loved. That's what matters most." As Emily drifted off to sleep, I realized that my revenge against Samantha wasn't about punishment or justice or proving who was right. It was about love winning, about family meaning more than blood, about a little girl finally getting the stability and devotion she'd always deserved, 2 years later. I stood in the kitchen of our new house, a modest colonial in a neighborhood with good schools and tree-lined streets, watching Emily help me frost her 8th birthday cake, chocolate with rainbow sprinkles, her current favorite. She concentrated intensely on spreading the frosting, her tongue poking out slightly in determination, and I marveled at how different our lives had become. I had kept my promise to prioritize her above everything else. 6 months after gaining custody, I resigned from the bench and took a position with a mid-sized law firm specializing in family law. The pay cut was significant, but the regular hours meant I could pick Emily up from school every day, help with homework, and tuck her in every night without the weight of pending cases keeping me awake until 2 in the morning. "Is it straight?" Emily asked, stepping back to examine her handiwork. "It's perfect," I assured her, and meant it. Everything about our life together felt perfect in ways I'd never expected. The small daily routines, the bedtime stories, the way she still crawled into my bed during thunderstorms, it all felt natural, like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. The doorbell rang, and Emily's face lit up. "That's probably the Martinez family." Carlos and Maria had become unlikely friends over the past 2 years. What had started as court-mandated visitation had evolved into genuine extended family. They came to Emily's school plays and soccer games, and we spent holidays together, creating new traditions that honored both the years they'd cared for her and our growing bond. But as Emily ran to answer the door, I saw an unexpected figure standing on my front porch alongside the Martinez family. Samantha. She looked different, healthier than she had in years. Actually, her hair was shorter, more conservative, and she wore a simple dress that suggested stability rather than trying to impress. She'd completed her probation 6 months ago and had been working steadily at a nonprofit organization that helped women in recovery. "I hope it's okay that I came," she said quietly, not quite meeting my eyes. "Maria mentioned it was Emily's birthday, and I hoped maybe—" Emily stared at the woman who had given birth to her but had been absent from her life for so long. There was no recognition in her face, no immediate emotional connection. Samantha was essentially a stranger, which was perhaps the most damning indictment of the choices she'd made. "Mama Clara," Emily said, using the name she'd started calling me 6 months earlier. "Who is this?" The question hung in the air, and I saw Samantha flinch as if she'd been slapped. But I also saw something else in her expression: acceptance, maybe even relief. She wasn't fighting for recognition or trying to reclaim a relationship that no longer existed. She was simply there, hoping to be allowed to witness a small piece of her daughter's joy. "This is Samantha," I said carefully. She's someone who cares about you very much." Emily studied Samantha with the serious expression she got when processing new information. "Do you want to help us finish decorating my cake?" It was such a simple invitation, delivered with the easy generosity of childhood, and I watched Samantha's carefully composed facade crack just slightly. "I'd like that very much," she said softly. The afternoon was surprisingly peaceful. Samantha helped with the decorations but didn't try to take center stage. She listened when Emily chattered about school and friends and her upcoming recital, asking appropriate questions but not pushing for deeper connection than Emily was comfortable with. When it came time for presents, she gave Emily a simple art set, thoughtful but not extravagant, appropriate for an aunt-like figure rather than someone trying to buy forgiveness. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Samantha approached me in the kitchen where I was cleaning up. "Thank you," she said simply, "for letting me come, for taking care of her, for being the mother I couldn't be." I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and realized that my anger had completely disappeared somewhere along the way. The revenge I'd thought I wanted had transformed into something else entirely: justice, healing, and ultimately, the family Emily deserved. "She's going to want to know more about you as she gets older," I said. "About her story, about where she came from. I hope you'll be willing to be part of that conversation when the time comes." "I'll be whatever you think is best for her," Samantha replied. "You've proven you know how to put her first. I'm still learning. After everyone left, Emily and I sat on her bed going through her birthday presents. She held up a photo frame the Martinez family had given her a picture of all of us together at her school's spring fair. Mama Clara, she said, using that name that still made my heart skip a beat every time I heard it. Do you think I have the biggest family ever? I looked at the photo me and Emily in the center, Carlos and Maria on one side, even Ethan, who had become an unexpected friend and occasional dinner guest, on the other. A family built not on blood or obligation, but on choice and love and the decision to show up for each other. I think you have exactly the right size family, I told her. Sometimes the best families are the ones we choose. As I tucked her in that night, Emily asked the question that had become part of our bedtime routine. Tell me the story about how you fought for me. It had become our own fairy tale, the story of the aunt who loved her niece so much she was willing to battle dragons and overcome obstacles to bring her home. In Emily's version, I was the hero, which still felt strange to me. I'd spent so many years being the responsible one, the dependable one, the one who cleaned up other people's messes, that it had taken me a long time to recognize my own strength. Once upon a time, I began, there was a little girl who needed someone to fight for her. But as I told the familiar story, I realized it wasn't really about fighting at all. It was about love, the kind of love that doesn't keep score or demand recognition, the kind that shows up consistently and refuses to give up even when everything seems hopeless. My revenge against Samantha had been the best kind of revenge, living well, loving deeply, and proving that family isn't about who shares your DNA, but about who shows up when it matters most. Emily fell asleep halfway through the story, a small smile on her face, safe and loved in the home we'd built together, and I realized that this quiet moment, this peaceful house, this child who called me Mama, this was everything I'd ever wanted, even when I didn't know I wanted it. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't about defeating your enemies. Sometimes they're about saving the people you love, including the parts of yourself you never knew existed. Thank you so much for listening to Clara and Emily's story. I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? Please let me know in the comments below where you're tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe to hear more stories like this one. I'd also love to hear your thoughts on family, second chances, and what it really means to fight for the people we love. Your comments and shares mean the world to me, so please take a moment to let me know what you think.